to get a visa to go anywhere. They wanted to go wherever, as long as they could get out of Germany. And we were fortunate, and they were able to get a visa to come to America.
And could you tell me that story again about your mother and with the Nazi getting beaten up? So could you tell me that story?
I would love to tell you that story. It's going to make me cry. My dad was in the men's clothing business. He had a store across the street, and he also had a store in the building that we had an apartment upstairs. And I used to spend a lot of time sitting on top of the steps watching the customers come in and the salesman giving them the suits or whatever. And one day my dad had to go into the market, I thought, to buy clothes, and my mother was in the store with the salesman, and 2 or 3 big guys in uniforms came in. I didn't know what they were, and they just took clothes and were going to walk out with them. And one of the salesmen said, "You can't do that." And my mother intervened, and she said, "No, you have to pay for these clothes. You can't just take them." And they said, "Oh yes," and they pushed my mother, and she fell to the floor. And here I was, maybe 5 years old, sitting on top of the stairs, seeing these big men pushing my mother. And I was petrified. I didn't know what to do. I was too little to go to help her. And this is something that I think I'll remember for the rest of my life.
And who were those guys?
Well, at the time I didn't know. They were Nazis.
Okay. Great. So could you then tell me a little bit about your life coming to America, what that was like?
It was strange. One day, my mother and father said, "You're going to spend the weekend with your aunt and uncle and your cousins, and you're going to sleep over." And I think it was the first time that I ever slept away from my own house, and I was very excited. And I had a wonderful time with my cousins, and one morning, my aunt said to me, "We are going to the beach, and you're going to stay here and wait for your mother and father." And I said, "But you can't leave me all by myself." And they said, "Well, we have to." And they left. And I was so frightened that I remember so clearly that I hid under the dining room table until my mother and father came. And I said to my mother and father, "Where are we going?" "Oh, we're just going someplace, but you've got to remember, you cannot talk. You must not speak." And the next thing I knew, we were on a train, and I didn't know where we were going. And in between countries, which I didn't know at the time, these men came in uniforms and whatnot, and they said, "Passports, passports," and I didn't know what that meant. And I remember my mother grabbing me by the arm and saying, "Shh, you mustn't talk. Whatever, you mustn't talk." And she squeezed my arm so tight. And later on I found out it was the border guards or whatever they are checking the control to make sure that you were a normal person with passports or whatever you needed. I remember that very vividly. If I see a uniform today, I still jump a little.
Great. And so do you think those kind of events in your life, how have they impacted you?
How did they impact me? For many, many years, I never thought of myself as a survivor. I came over unfortunately, my mother passed. My sister, I'll backtrack. My mother gave me a sister who's 10.5 years younger. And when my sister was 7.5 and I was on my 18th birthday, she passed away from cancer. I went to college. I met my husband, an American. We were married. I was still in college. I was in my junior year of college. We married, and I put everything out of my mind. I was an American. I thought I was a citizen. It turned out when my husband and I were going to be married, he said, do me a favor, you don't have a birth certificate. Go down to immigration and make sure that we were going to go to Bermuda, that I would have the proper paperwork. And when I went to immigration, to make a long story short, they said to me that you're not a citizen, you can't leave the country because your father became a citizen, but your mother wasn't a citizen. She was too sick to be sworn in, and because of that, because she died on your 18th birthday, you're not a citizen. It used to be, you used to be a citizen of your mother and father, but this was such a unique case that the immigration person said, you know what, I'm going to call Washington. It's a story I just remembered. I'm going to call Washington and I'm going to find out what we can do so you can get married and leave the country to go on your honeymoon. And they said, well, you need the re-entry permit, but that's going to take 3 weeks. And I said, but I'm getting married next week. Well, they rushed it, and I got it. And I remember we were going on the plane to go down to Bermuda. And here I was with the orchid, and there were other couples. And I was the only one who had to be checked extra carefully, because I wasn't a citizen. I was a war bride or whatever. It was very strange. And same thing coming home. We came home on the ship from Bermuda, and my husband said, I have to report to Deck B. For the citizens, you go to the aliens. And it's the first time really I heard the word alien. And 2 minutes later, he came fuming. He said, here I was in the army, here I was wounded, and I have to register with the aliens. That was the law. So we got our papers and we came off the ship and everything was fine. And my husband said, now you're going to become a citizen. And we applied, and almost immediately I was called to the judge, and I was in college at the time. I was in my senior year at NYU, and the judge said to me, I've got to ask some questions. I said, sure. And he said, name the 13 states. And I said, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, And he looked at me and he said, you know, young lady, you're taking this for granted. Don't you ever take American citizenship for granted. And I want you to remember this for the rest of your life. Well, I did. It was the proudest moment for me to raise my head to become a citizen. And that's the one thing that I question when I see Americans taking it for granted. It's so precious.
So, what other things do you think have affected you because of your background, because of being a Holocaust survivor?
I think what's affected me as you get older, things become clearer in your mind as far as your past is concerned. Things that you put out of your mind, and it was easy to do that when you're younger because you haven't time to think. But as you get older, you have a lot of time and things come back. And I think that's affected me most. Two things, good and bad. I'll start with the bad. The fear factor of the unknown. Of, as you age, you're not as sure of your own footing. You don't know what's in store for you. Somehow when you're young, you're building, you're progressing. But when you reach that plateau of 90s, life changes. And I think being a Holocaust survivor makes it even more so, because you've lived two lives. It's not one life.